Welcome to the Unlist. Bit of an impromptu video, of course. I'm filming this very close to my face because I'm holding my phone. So this is how it's being done today, this particular video. And I want to talk a little bit about the defining smells of the 2010s. A question that gets asked a little bit on base notes sometimes. I don't really know what's going on with Fragrantica because I don't go there unless I'm looking at the database. I don't really go hang out with the crowd. More like an insane asylum. But base notes tends to be a lot of bookish types, bookish work from home types and retirees, people who don't go outside. So a lot of those guys are into artisanal fragrances, they're into vintages, they're into stuff that is not really smelled in the wild. And because they don't go outside, right, they work from home or they're retired, they might go down to the local pharmacy and pick up their prescription or something, but everything else is delivered to their front door via Uber Eats or something. They don't go outside much. They don't really know who's wearing what and what's popular. They only see what they see from YouTubers and such. And a lot of those guys, as we've discussed in the past, are kind of shilling something. So you don't really get an idea of what people are wearing, right, if you live in that little reality bubble. So I'm one of the few people on that site that really still has a commuting job to and from, since I work basically a service job by being into security. So, and now I work in the heart of downtown Bellevue. And because I work in the heart of downtown Bellevue, I've gotten a much better gauge on what people are wearing. When I worked in Seattle, I had Pike Place Market that I walked through every day. But most of the downtown core in Seattle, and I'm not trying to be political, this is just stating the facts, but a lot of downtown Seattle is just, wastelands of tents and piss and shit and needles and pills, and it's just, it smells like the end times. And I guess for downtown Seattle, it kind of is the end times. All the stores are boarded up and closed, windows smashed in, graffiti everywhere. You're not going to get a gauge on what people are wearing fragrance-wise when you're surrounded by, drugland dystopia. So, for better or for worse, like I said, I'm not trying to make any statements about the wherefores and the why to's on that. You guys can parse that information however you want. But I walked through that every day, and the only real insight on what the public is interested in that I would gather when I worked in Seattle was walking through the First Avenue area where all the nightclubs and bars and pubs are located. Those people were wearing whatever current fragrances were out. Pike Place is a bunch of tourists, so it's kind of a mixed bag. I'd smell vintages, I'd smell modern stuff, I'd smell, hippies and hipsters wearing patchouli oil or Nag Champa or whatever. So, but since I've relocated to Bellevue, now I walk past all the strip malls, all the department stores, all of the big grocery store chains like Safeway, and, I get to smell basically, instead of druggy dystopia wasteland, now I smell vapid consumerism wasteland, right? Still a wasteland, just a different kind of wasteland. And a lot of those people, lo and behold, they're wearing modern designers, modern niche fragrances. So I get a better gauge of what the smell of the 2010s and arguably first half of the 2020s is actually about, right? So what is the defining smell of the last 10, 15 years, okay, since 2010 forward? What does that smell? People on base notes ask it. They don't really know. They assume. They go by what the YouTubers say, which is always bad because those guys shill stuff. And they get promoted materials. And they like to make guesses, but honestly, they're incorrect. Like I said, they don't go out and walk around people, so they don't really know. And people in Fragrantica are in their own little la-la land too. So people in Fragrantica think stuff like Ganymede and Bois Imperial is actually popular. I'm like, no. Ganymede and Bois Imperial, Bois de Imperial, whatever it is, that stuff is popular with frag heads. It's not popular in the wild. Never smelled Ganymede on anybody in the wild. I've never smelled any Nishane fragrance at all. Fan Your Flames, Ani, the asteroid one that I don't remember the name number combination of, Hachivat, None of that stuff is smelled in the wild, okay? I'm not smelling any of the usual, like, darling fragrances that the frag commerce, on YouTube and for granted go. They say, oh, this is the hotness. Everyone's wearing this. You're wrong. You're wrong. Everyone's not wearing that stuff. So, what is the hoi polloi, therefore, wearing? What has been the popular thing for the past 10, 15 years? Well, despite what people may tell you, and I don't want to name drop too many influencers and get their armies coming after me, but I have to name some for context. I have to. But despite what people like maybe Jeremy Fragrance and Redolessence and Max 14, guys like that, despite what they tell you, I guess Fragmental would be another one. Despite what they tell you, stuff like Aventus and YSL L'Homme and La Nuit de L'Homme, those are not actually ubiquitous everywhere scents. The amount of times I've smelled Aventus in public, the amount of times I've smelled YSL L'Homme or La Nuit de L'Homme in public, minimal. Severely minimal. Those are still very expensive perfumes, okay? Aventus is now breaking $500. And, arguably 10, 15 years ago, maybe it was a little more accessible because we're talking $275, $300, discounted bottles for about $150. I know. Remember the days you could get a bottle of Aventus for $150? Yeah, those days are gone. But, arguably maybe a little more popular then. And then you're going to say, oh, what about all the clones? Oh, there's so many clones everywhere. Oh, Club de Nuit Intense, or Rayanne Tradition 2, or the Perrier America, or Mont Blanc, Explorer, all that stuff. No, surprisingly, I don't smell a lot of those either. And I own all those. I own Explorer. I own Club de Nuit Intense. And I don't get them in the wild. A little bit, again, here and there. And honestly, they all blend together, right? They all smell kind of the same. So if you smell any sort of Aventus type anything, it's rare. It's fairly rare. What I do smell a lot of is Sauvage. So you can take that to the bank, that fragrance is definitely, Sauvage is the eternity of its era. It is the Drakkar Noir of its era. It is the Paco Rabanne Pour Homme, the Brut, okay, of its era. All of these big watershed masculine fragrances that were once everywhere. Everywhere you went, you smelled Paco Rabanne. Everywhere you went, you smelled Brut. Everywhere you went, Drakkar Noir and Eternity in the 80s. Well, yeah, that is Sauvage now. I would also argue that Invictus and all of its descendants, all of the what I call bubblegum shower gel, those are still very popular. And they're not all exactly the same. So I don't want to blame it all on Invictus. It isn't all Invictus. It's just something in the wheelhouse. That particular combination of grapefruit and ethyl maltol with some sort of juniper and like an ambergris base underneath that, the smell when you encounter it. It's the same smell as Jimmy Choo Urban Hero, the same smell as certain flankers of the Valentino Born in Roma line. It's the same smell as the Awakened by Toomey. It's the same smell as the Rasasi Hawass line. All of those, okay, guys? All of those. Invictus Aqua, Mont Blanc Legend Spirit. So all of those quote-unquote bubblegum shower gel fragrances, they are probably 10 to 1 with Aventus, 10 to 1. And then Sauvage is also about 10 to 1. So you might catch Invictus or Sauvage at least once per day. Walking through Bellevue, the malls, like I said, the grocery stores, anywhere in and around the upper middle class area, you will catch those smells at least once per day. But you might smell Aventus once a month. By comparison. So it is not on the same tier. Now, Baccarat Rouge 540 and all of its various ilk, I dare say, is more common. I think, despite how big Sauvage has become, I think Baccarat Rouge 540, Yeah, I smell that multiple times a day, every day, and I smell it on men. I smell it on women. I smell all of the different like variations on that theme. So Cloud by Ariana Grande. I'm sure some people are rocking the Club de Nuit Untold because it's like 35 bucks, just 1/10 the price of the real stuff, right? You can get 10 bottles of that for one bottle of Baccarat Rouge. Doesn't make sense to buy Baccarat Rouge when Untold exists. Just doesn't make sense. It's like the same smell, you know. And then of course stuff like the various Oud 4 fragrances, which they kind of copied a bit of the Baccarat Rouge theme. They just added lavender to the mix. So like the Oud for Greatness, Oud for Happiness, Oud for Greatness Neo, all of those scents kind of also slide into the same sort of profile that Baccarat Rouge 540 has. They just, like I said, add a little bit more woodiness, a little more lavender, tone down the sweetness somewhat, which also means your Parfums de Marly Haltane or Haltan, however you pronounce it. Everything in that particular genre of that Evernal overdose, that's what it is. It's Evernal. It's overdosed. It's synthetic oak moss that's been overdosed with cashmeran and other materials, ethyl maltol, stuff like that. So if your Invictus is your so-called ambroxan bomb, right? And I guess your Sauvage would be considered that too, right? If those are your ambroxan bombs, then your BR540 is your Evernal bomb, really. So, and then surprisingly, I get a lot of Mont Blanc Legend. A lot of y'all want to hate on that fragrance, but I feel like you're alone in that hate since I still smell a lot of it. And some of it could be Fierce, which is an analog, right? Some of it could be Eternity or Curve, but unlikely because Curve and Eternity have a bit more on the sharper side of things. They're not as smooth and sweet. Or the Fierce and the Legend are much sweeter and smoother. You know, plasticine would be a word you could use to describe it. They're kind of more plasticky. I like them though. Don't get me wrong. I own a bottle of Legend. I'm not going to hate on the Legend. It might be more plasticky or synthetic, but it's a pleasant fragrance, so I like it. It's a no-brainer, and apparently a lot of people feel the same way I do, and they also wear a lot of it. So, and then there's all that really sharp Comet Wood type stuff I call Comet Cleanser, which includes Tom Ford, Oud Wood, and all of its analogs. So I'm guessing Oud Wood and Thamine carved oud, but I doubt people are wearing that because again, that's a niche fragrance. So if it's not oud wood, it's one of its many cheap cologne versions, but that's the smell. That Tom Ford oud wood. Fragrances that used to be popular that I am now smelling a lot less of. I feel like you could call them the defining smell of the 2010s, but they didn't really make it into the 2020s. I would say Bleu de Chanel. I do not smell Bleu de Chanel, and many of its imitators were very popular in the 2010s, but they didn't survive. That's why into 2024, I don't think I've ever noticed Bleu de Chanel in anyone. So that's saying something. Maybe that's why Chanel put out this Super Leggera thing, right? This Allure Homme Super Leggera, because they're testing the waters. They need a new uh, mass appeal, new watershed fragrance. Bleu de Chanel is not getting discontinued, right? Because, I mean, Antaeus is still around. Egoist is still around. These older fragrances are still around. So don't get scared. Bleu de Chanel is going away. But it has clearly had its 15 minutes of fame. It has had its day in the sun. And Chanel is now looking to put something else in its place for popularity's sake. I do not smell any of the Bleu de Chanel releases in the wild. I don't. And another thing I don't smell a lot of anymore, that I used to smell a lot of like 5, 6, 7 years ago, is the Tobacco Vanille. The Tom Ford Tobacco Vanille and a lot of its analogs. So I'm not smelling a lot of 1 million anymore. I'm not smelling a lot of the One, Dolce & Gabbana the One. A lot of these sweet sort of vanilla tobacco-y kind of fragrances, sweet tobacco-y fragrances, which is what 1 million was. It's what the One by Dolce & Gabbana was, that kind of thing, Tobacco Vanille. And like I said, La Yucca Warm is another one, I guess. I think that one's more of a Tuscan leather clone, but you get my point. The sweet vanilla tobacco thing is done. I'm not getting that. People aren't wearing that stuff. So, and like I said, 7, 8 years ago, it was everywhere. I got so sick of tobacco vanille. I like started to hate this stuff. Started to really hate this stuff. But I've got a bottle of Eau de Ball right now, which was actually the progenitor. It came out before tobacco vanille, but I've got that. I could start wearing that. I don't really catch it in the wild. It's not out there anymore, not like it used to be. So to wrap up here, because I'm 15 minutes in now, if you were to ask me what the defining smell of the 2010s was, based on what I've seen peak and recede, I would tell you that Aventus was definitely a inspiration on the direction of men's fragrances in the 2010s, and it had a bubble. It definitely had a bubble. I want to say that bubble probably peaked in 2017, so more than halfway through the decade. 2015 to 2017 is when the hysteria peaked. But at the end of the decade, by 2010 and 11, people had moved on, right? They had gotten the clones out of their system. They had gotten the batch code stuff out of their system. And Sauvage just kind of moved right on in. Bleu de Chanel was the same way. Bleu de Chanel was a market leader. It was a very big inspirational fragrance. It created a lot of imitators, like the Missoni Parfum Pour-Homme, for instance, was a good imitator. A little bit sweeter, a little more lavender in that. But again, those fragrances don't seem to really get traction anymore. They, again, had their day in the sun. But the sweeter stuff, for better or for worse, the Gucci Guilty range still goes strong. The Invictus range still goes strong. All of those, like I said, bubblegum shower gel fragrances, the Valentino Uomo Born Aroma stuff. Y, the Y range by YSL, not L'Homme, not La Nuit L'Homme, but the Y range, YEDP, Y Parfum, all of those are probably, if you were to ask me what the defining smell of the 2010s was, it's going to be that stuff. Okay, that stuff, Sauvage, and then BR 540. I can't include Tom Ford Oud Wood because that is not a 2010s fragrance. That's a 2000s fragrance that just survived as long as it did. But we're talking strictly 2010s, what the defining smell of fragrances that originated in that decade. Okay, fragrances that originated in that decade. It would have to be the Invictus, the Sauvage. That's in the BR 540. I think the Aventus and Bleu de Chanel, they were definitely foreshadowing. Aventus, Bleu de Chanel foreshadowed where things were headed, but they didn't have the sweetness. That really heavy bubblegum sweetness was the missing thing. And I'm not saying I want that. I don't want a super bubblegummy Aventus that'd be gross. Same thing, I don't want a super bubblegummy Bleu de Chanel that'd be nasty. But it's that tooth-achingly sweet bubblegummy smell that was introduced by Gucci, by Invictus, okay, by those fragrances. Why? Okay, BR 540 has it too. That bubblegum sweetness is the defining characteristic of 2010's fragrances, which makes Sauvage an outlier. Sauvage is a clear outlier. It is the one that's not sweet. Perhaps the Sauvage is therefore the foil, if you will. Whereas all the bubblegummy sweet stuff is the straight man, right? It's playing it straight. That's what's dominating. But then the Sauvage is disruptive. It's disruptive because it's stiff, it's strong, it's acrid, it's a bit irritating. It's very singular. It slices through the air like it does. You guys know what Sauvage smells like. I don't need to tell you. It's the foil. It's kind of the bad boy disruptive fragrance. If you're a good little sheep, a good little conformist, you want to be cool, you want to have friends, you want to make friends and influence people or whatever, you wear your Invictuses, you wear your BR 540s, you wear your bubblegummy stuff, right? Your Y fragrances. You wear your Awakens, your Urban Heroes, that stuff. But if you want to be the disruptive guy, the guy that gets kicked out of places, so the guy that gets videos made about him having drunken bar fights or whatever, then you're the Sauvage guy, which makes the Johnny Depp commercials actually fit. You wouldn't think they would fit because the fragrance doesn't really seem to give you that bad boy image. But, set against a backdrop of bubblegum sweetness, yeah, that is a rather disruptive fragrance. It is. And in the proper context, it makes sense. So that's it, guys. The defining smell of the 2010s. I didn't mention women's stuff. I mean, BR540 is very popular with ladies, but I did mention women's stuff because they tend to not have the mono smell, right? Men's fragrances have always had this decade-defining mono smell. Like the 80s, mono smell was basically oak moss and the really aquatic stuff. And then the 90s mono smell was all the Kalone and all of that. And then the 2000s mono smell was all of that really sharp, shrill, fruity, musky stuff that we call ozonics. So the 2010s, the mono smell that men dealt with and are still dealing with now is that bubblegum stuff. All right, this has been the Unlist. I'll catch you later.